The grand rotunda of the High Synod of Zaltora did not merely house the government. It was designed to intimidate history itself. The walls were not built of stone, but of a crystallized lattice grown from the core of a dying neutron star, shimmering with a refractive index that turned the ambient light into a kaleidoscope of oppressive violets and terrifying golds. Here, the air was scrubbed of all particulate matter, leaving it sterile, cold, and tasting faintly of ozone and ancient authority. In the center of the vast, circular chamber, suspended within a gravity-null field, floated a holographic projection that dominated the attention of the 12 High Counselors. They were beings of grace and terrifying symmetry, their chitinous armor polished to a mirror sheen, their elongated limbs resting upon consoles of floating obsidian. But today, the legendary composure of the Zaltora was fractured. A silence, heavy and suffocating, hung over the assembly, a silence that was not the absence of sound, but the presence of fear. High Counselor Valdrin, whose carapace bore the gilded etchings of 4 centuries of rule, stared at the projection with compound eyes that twitched in a rhythm of suppressed panic. The object displayed in the hologram was an affront to every aesthetic and engineering principle the galaxy had held sacred for 10,000 cycles. It was a monstrosity. A jagged, asymmetrical bruise against the velvet backdrop of the void. It possessed no clean lines, no unified hull, no harmonic engine signatures. It was a chaotic amalgamation of 1,000 dead ships, a necropolis of metal welded together in the dark, screaming its existence through the vacuum. It was the ship the humans called Asterisk, the sovereign of Rust Asterisk, but to the High Synod it was simply the abomination. Valdrin's mandibles clicked, a sharp, dry sound that echoed through the acoustic perfection of the chamber. He gestured with a 3-fingered hand, and the hologram zoomed in, revealing the terrible texture of the vessel's skin. There were hull plates from the fallen Drexian Empire, welded clumsily to the warp nacelles of a long-extinct cybernetic race. There were vast sections of asteroid rock fused directly into the structural integrity, held in place by magnetic clamps that leaked radiation like a bleeding wound. It looked fragile. It looked desperate. And yet, the sensor readings scrolling rapidly beneath the image told a different, impossible story. "It defies the fundamental laws of mass displacement," Valdrin whispered, his voice a low thrum that vibrated in the chests of the other counselors. The sheer density of the object should cause it to collapse under its own gravitational stress. It is not a ship. It is a traveling singularity wrapped in garbage. And yet, it moves. It navigates the slipstreams with a precision that our most advanced cruisers cannot replicate. How is this possible? How can a species that barely mastered fusion 3 centuries ago construct a leviathan that makes our dreadnoughts look like toys? Fleetmaster Calith, a warrior caste counselor whose armor was scarred from the border wars of the previous epoch, leaned forward. His voice was harsh, grinding like tectonic plates. "It is not construction, counselor. It is cannibalism. Look at the dorsal ridge." He pointed a claw at the projection. "That is the command spire of a Vouge battle carrier, a ship lost in the Great Silence 500 cycles ago, and beneath it, the thermal vents of a primitive industrial station. They have not built a ship. They have resurrected the dead. They scavenge the battlefields of history, weld the corpses together, and propel it with an energy source we cannot identify. It is an insult to the purity of the void." "It is a threat," Valdrin corrected, his tone turning icy. "It is currently holding position in the Terminus sector, a region of space designated as uninhabitable due to the gravimetric shears. No ship should be able to maintain structural integrity there. The Shatter-class storms would tear a standard vessel apart in microcycles. Yet this heap of scrap sits there, unmoving, waiting. Our long-range telepathy intercepts nothing but static, a wall of white noise so dense it causes our psychers to seize." The chamber descended into hushed murmurs. The fear was palpable. The Zaltora, along with the other member species of the Galactic Concordat, had spent millennia cultivating a galaxy of order. They had paved the warp lanes, standardized technology, and enforced a peace based on aesthetic perfection and logical hierarchy. Humanity had been a footnote, a localized curiosity confined to a resource-poor arm of the spiral. They were dismissed as chaotic, short-lived, and prone to illogical sentimentalism. When the humans had begun to expand, they did not build shining fleets of white ceramic. They did not terraform worlds into gardens. They disappeared into the debris fields. They vanished into the graveyards of E-Galaxy, the places where the Concordat dumped the wreckage of its wars. For decades, they were ignored. They were the scavengers, the bottom feeders, but now the bottom feeders had returned and they were piloting a mountain. "We sent the 7th Fleet," Calith admitted, his voice dropping an octave, tinged with a shame that was painful to witness. Standard interdiction protocols. We demanded they power down and submit to inspection. We fired warning shots across their bow. And Valdrin asked, though he dreaded the answer. They did not return fire, Calith said, the memory seemingly haunting him. They simply absorbed it. Our plasma torpedoes impacted that chaotic hull and vanished. No explosion, no debris. The energy was simply eaten. Then the ship turned. It did not bank, it rotated on an axis that shouldn't exist, facing the fleet. And then the sensors went blind, not jammed, blind. For 10 minutes, the 7th Fleet floated in total darkness, systems dead, life support on emergency reserves. When power returned, the human ship was gone. It had not warped out. It had simply ceased to be there. A ripple of unease moved through the council. This was not war, this was something else. This was a mastery of physics that rendered war obsolete. If the humans could negate energy and vanish at will, the vast armadas of the Concordat were useless. Diplomacy is the only avenue, came a soft, melodic voice from the far side of the circle. It was High Speaker Alara of the Psionic Conclave, her form shrouded in shifting silks. We have analyzed the static. It is not noise. It is a song, a dirge, millions of voices layered over one another. They are not hiding counselors. They are mourning. We must invite them here. We must understand what they have built before we decide to destroy it or be destroyed by it. Valdrin hesitated. To invite a scavenger race into the High Synod was a violation of protocol so severe it could dissolve the government. But the image of the asterisk sovereign of Rust burned in his mind, the sheer impossible scale of it. Very well, he said finally, the words tasting like ash. Send the summons, grant them safe passage. Let us see the architects of this monstrosity. The waiting period was excruciating. Cycles passed, and the tension within the High Synod grew to a fever pitch. Reports trickled in from the outer rim, sightings of smaller human vessels, all built from the same patchwork aesthetic, moving in coordination, forming a perimeter around the core systems. They were not attacking, they were watching. And then the arrival came. It did not happen at the designated docking spire. It did not happen within the standard traffic lanes. The air in the Grand Rotunda suddenly dropped 30 degrees. The light from the neutron star walls flickered and dimmed. A deep, resonant thrumming sound, like the heartbeat of a planet, began to emanate from the floor itself. The counselors stood, weapons drawn, confusion reigning. The center of the chamber, the gravity null zone, began to warp. Space itself seemed to bruise, turning a sickly purple, then tearing open. There was no flash of light, no warp tunnel. The Sovereign of Rust did not fit inside the chamber, of course. It was the size of a moon, but a shuttle did, and even the shuttle was an affront. It materialized out of the tier in reality, a blocky, ugly brick of a ship, scarred with burns, welded together from the cockpits of 3 different species fighters. It landed with a heavy industrial clang on the polished obsidian floor, cracking the pristine surface. Steam hissed from vent ports, smelling of burnt hydrocarbons and old copper. The ramp descended with a groan of stressed metal. The counselors held their breath. They expected warriors in power armor or perhaps cybernetic horrors. Instead, a single figure walked down the ramp. He was of average height, wearing a uniform that was a patchwork of fabrics, a heavy leather flight jacket over a synthetic bodysuit that had been patched and repatched. He was old for a human, his hair entirely white, his face a map of deep lines and scars. He wore no helmet, breathing the sterile air of the Synod with a look of mild distaste. Behind him walked 2 others, younger, carrying heavy crates that hummed with a low frequency. They set the crates down and stepped back, hands clasped behind their backs, their expressions unreadable, disciplined, calm. The older human stepped forward. He looked at the high counselors, not with fear and not with arrogance. He looked at them with a profound, exhausting pity. "I am Captain Elias Thorne," the human said. His voice was rough, natural, unmodulated by translators, though the universal systems picked it up and relayed the meaning. "You asked for us. We are here." Valdrin stepped down from his dais, his height towering over the human. He tried to project the majesty of the Empire. "You have violated the borders of the Concordat, Captain Thorne. You pilot a vessel that is a hazard to navigation and an insult to the laws of physics. You disrupt the peace. Explain yourself and explain the nature of that thing you call a ship." Thorne looked at the hologram of his ship, still floating above them. A faint smile touched his lips, sad and knowing. "You call it scrap," Thorne said softly. "You look at it and you see garbage. You see the refuse of your wars, the broken hulls of the species you failed to protect, the leftovers of the civilizations you let die because they didn't meet your aesthetic standards." He took a step closer to Valdrin. The guards tensed, but Valdrin held up a hand. "That ship isn't built from scrap," Thorne continued, his voice gaining strength, echoing off the crystal walls. "It's built from memory. Every plate on that hull has a name." Every engine we welded into the core belonged to a people who screamed for help while you debated protocols in this silent room. The Drexian plating. They died holding the line against the Scourge while your fleets waited for orders. The Vowelge Command Spire. They self-destructed to save a colony world you had already written off as a statistical loss. Thorn gestured to the crates his subordinates had brought. You think we built the asterisk sovereign to threaten you? You think we are conquerors? We are archivists. We are the grave keepers of the galaxy. We picked up the pieces you threw away because we found something in them. We found that different technologies, different philosophies, different materials, they don't have to be uniform to work together. They just have to be held together by something stronger than magnetic bolts. And what is that? Fleetmaster Calith sneered. Hope, sentiment, these are not engineering constants. Will, Thorn said, and necessity. He walked over to one of the crates and tapped a sequence on the lid. It hissed open. Inside was not a weapon, but a complex, chaotic knot of crystals and wires pulsing with a rhythm that matched the dreadnought outside. Your science is based on purity, Thorn said, addressing the room. You refine, you standardize, you isolate. You seek the perfect wavelength, the perfect alloy. But the universe isn't pure. The universe is a mess. And there is something coming that doesn't care about your purity. In fact, your purity is exactly what it feeds on. The atmosphere in the room shifted from hostility to confusion. What are you speaking of? Valdrin demanded. There are no threats on the long-range scans. The galaxy is pacified. The galaxy is quiet, Thorn corrected. There is a difference. We found it in the static. We found it in the ruin of the Vowelge data cores. They didn't die from a plague, counselors. They were harvested. There is a signal coming from the intergalactic void. Resonance frequency. It targets harmonic structures. It targets standardized energy lattices. It shatters them. Thorn pressed a button on the device. A holographic simulation filled the air. It showed a fleet of the Concordat's pristine white ships. A wave of invisible energy passed over them. Instantly, their reactors went critical. Their hulls, tuned to the exact same frequency for perfection, shattered simultaneously. The simulation showed total annihilation. Then the simulation changed. It showed the asterisk sovereign of Rust Asterisk. The same wave hit it, but the sovereign was a mess. It was made of lead, gold, titanium, ceramic, organic resin, and stone. The wave hit the Drexian steel and dissipated. It hit the asteroid rock and was absorbed. It hit the mismatched shield generators and refracted harmlessly. The ship shook, but it survived, because it was not uniform. It was complex. It was broken, and therefore it could not be broken in the same way twice. The signal is 3 weeks away, Thorn said, dropping the bombshell into the silence. Your sensors can't see it because they are tuned to look for order. The signal is chaos. We saw it because we live in the chaos. We built the asterisk sovereign not to fight you, but to shield you. Valdrin stared at the simulation, his mind racing. The arrogance that had sustained his worldview began to crack. He looked at the human, this short, scarred creature in his patched jacket, and saw something he had never considered, resilience. The humans hadn't scavenged because they were poor. They had scavenged because they were preparing. You intend to use that ship as a shield? Valdrin asked, his voice trembling. One ship against a cosmic wave. Not just one, Thorn said. We have built a network, but the Sovereign is the anchor. We need to park it in the geostationary orbit of your capital. We need to link its chaotic core to your planetary grid. We need to introduce noise into your perfect system. We have to make you impure enough to survive the pass. Impossible, Calith barked. You ask us to pollute the grand grid with junk data, with unstable energy. It will crash the economy. It will disrupt the aesthetic harmony of the homeworld. Thorn looked at Calith with eyes that were cold and hard as the void. Better an ugly survivor than a beautiful corpse, Fleetmaster. We didn't come here to ask for permission. We came here to explain why we are doing it. The Sovereign is already moving into position. Panic erupted. Guards stepped forward, leveling plasma rifles at the humans. Thorn didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. Shoot me, Thorn said calmly. And the synchronization codes die with me. The signal hits and your crystal cities shatter into dust. Or stand down, listen to the scavengers, and live to write history books about how humiliation saved your empire. A long, agonizing silence stretched. Valdrin looked at the device in the crate. He looked at the simulation. He looked at the face of the human, a face that had seen the worst the universe had to offer and had decided to weld it together and keep flying. Valdrin raised his hand. Stand down, he ordered the guards. The weapons lowered. You say this signal targets harmony, Valdrin asked. It targets uniformity, Thorn said. It's a harvest wave. It clears the field of monocultures. We are the weeds, counselor, and the weeds survive. Activating the link requires access to the core synod processors, Valdrin said, his mind working through the logistics, the terrible, necessary logistics. It would require us to graft your technology onto ours. It will be ugly, Thorn warned. It will look like a scar on the face of your planet. Cables running through the streets, generators bolted to your pristine towers. We have spent 10,000 years perfecting this world, Valdrin whispered. Then you have 10,000 years of reasons to save it, Thorn replied. The transition was not Act 3, but the bridge to it. The next few days were a blur of frantic, terrifying activity. The Sovereign of Rust descended into the upper atmosphere of the capital world, Zalprime. It blotted out the suns. It was a horrific sight to the citizens below, a mountain of jagged metal hanging in the sky, dripping coolant and radiating heat. Human engineers wearing bulky utilitarian suits teleported down to the surface. They worked alongside the elegant, slender Zaltora technicians. The culture clash was violent. The aliens wanted to route power through harmonic conduits. The humans insisted on heavy-gauge copper cabling and redundant analog breakers. They smashed through the crystal walls of the power stations to install dampeners made of lead and concrete. They hacked the global communication arrays, injecting loops of static, old radio broadcasts, and binary garbage data to disrupt the perfect signal clarity. To the Zaltora, it was a desecration. They wept as they watched their beautiful city being defaced. But Thorn stood in the command center of the Sovereign Asterisk, watching the readouts. He watched the wave approaching. It wasn't a fleet, it wasn't a monster. It was a wall of violet light moving at slightly less than light speed, stripping the atoms from anything that resonated at the galactic standard frequency. It had already consumed 3 uninhabited systems. It was the Great Filter, the cosmic lawnmower coming to trim the grass. Impact in 10 minutes, Thorn broadcasted to the planet below. Brace yourselves, it's going to get loud. Valdrin stood on the balcony of the Synod looking up at the Sovereign. Cables as thick as buildings ran from the ship's belly down to the city, pulsing with dirty, chaotic orange light. The sky turned purple. The air began to scream. The signal hit. It was not an explosion. It was a sound, a pure, piercing note that was beautiful and deadly. It struck the planetary shield and shattered it instantly. It struck the crystal spires. But then the Sovereign screamed back. The massive ship activated every engine, every emitter, every mismatched piece of tech it had scavenged over the centuries. It didn't broadcast a counternote. It broadcasted a scream. A chaotic, discordant, multiphasic roar of energy. It pumped that chaos down the cables into the planetary grid. The lights in the city flickered and changed color. The harmonic resonance that held the buildings together was disrupted by the sheer noise of the human intervention. The buildings shook, glass cracked, statues toppled, but they did not shatter. The signal washed over the planet, searching for the perfect frequency to latch onto, but it found only mud. It found a planet vibrating with the chaotic, messy, resilient energy of humanity. The wave passed. Silence returned to Zalprime, but it was not the sterile silence of before. It was a silence filled with the groaning of stressed metal, the hiss of steam, and the ragged breathing of billions of survivors. Valdrin looked around. The grand rotunda was cracked. A massive fissure ran through the floor. The lights were flickering. It was imperfect. It was damaged. He looked up. The Sovereign of Rust was still there, smoke pouring from its dorsal ridge, its shields gone, its hull glowing red from the heat of the discharge. It looked like a burning coal in the sky. Thorn's voice came over the comms, weak and static-filled. "Signal has passed, residuals clearing, you're still there, counselors?" Valdrin picked up the comm unit. His hand was shaking. He looked at his scarred city, the ugly cables that had saved them. He realized then that the aesthetic perfection of the Empire had been a coffin they were building for themselves. "We are here, Captain," Valdrin said. "We are intact." "Good," Thorn said. "We blew 3 main capacitors and the starboard fusion drive is melting, but we're good, requesting permission to detach and drift for repairs." "Permission denied," Valdrin said, surprising himself. "Say again?" Thorn asked. "You will not drift," Valdrin said, his voice gaining a new kind of authority, one born not of tradition but of gratitude. "You will dock, we will assist with repairs, and, Captain, yeah, we have much scrap metal in the outer sectors, debris from the old wars, we always considered it blight." Valdrin looked at the cracks in his perfect walls. "We would like to know how to use it. We would like to know how to build a ship that does not break." Thorn laughed, a raspy, tired sound. "Well, first you gotta stop worrying about how it looks and start worrying about what it does. Come on up, counselor. I'll buy you a drink. It's terrible, synthesized sludge, but it'll keep you warm." The ending of the story was not a treaty signed on paper. It was the image of the Zalprime skyline months later. The crystal spires were still there, but they were reinforced with bands of gray steel. The streets were no longer silent. They hummed with the noise of different species mingling. And in the high orbit, the Sovereign of Rust was no longer alone. It was the flagship of a new fleet, a fleet of mismatched, ugly, magnificent ships built by the Concordat and humanity together. They were no longer the galaxy's biggest threat. They were its immune system. Deep in the void, beyond the rim, the source of the signal adjusted its calculations. It had encountered civilizations of light, of crystal, of pure energy, and it had consumed them all. But this was new. This was a civilization of rust and bone, of grit and noise. It was a variable the cosmos had not accounted for. And for the first time in eons, the darkness hesitated. The psychological shift within the High Synod was not immediate, nor was it painless. In the weeks following the passing of the signal, the Zaltora society faced an existential crisis that threatened to tear their culture apart more effectively than the energy wave ever could have. Their religion, their philosophy, their very identity was founded on the concept of *ethel*, the divine symmetry, the belief that moral goodness was physically manifested in order, cleanliness, and geometric perfection. To be broken was to be wicked. To be patched was to be sinful. Yet they were alive only because of a patchwork abomination. High Counselor Valdrin found himself walking the lower districts of the capital, a place he had not visited in 200 years. Before, these areas were kept hidden, scrubbed by drones. Now they were the staging grounds for the Human Engineering Corps. He watched a team of human welders securing a massive structural brace to the side of a delicate crystalline university. The brace was ugly, dark, matte metal, bolted on with crude rivets. A young Zaltora student, her chitin pale and trembling, stood watching them. She looked at Valdrin, recognizing his rank, and gestured to the humans. "High Counselor," she clicked softly. "Must it remain? The danger has passed. Can we not remove these scars? Can we not restore the *ethel*?" Valdrin looked at the brace. He saw the weld marks, the places where the metal had been heated and fused. He looked at the humans, sweating, cursing in their strange, guttural tongue, eating nutrient paste from squeezed tubes. They were loud. They smelled of biology and labor. "Look closer, child," Valdrin said, his voice gentle. The student hesitated, then stepped forward. "The brace is not merely holding the wall," Valdrin pointed out. "See how it flexes? The crystal is rigid. If the ground shakes again, the crystal will snap. The metal gives, it bends, it endures stress so the crystal does not have to." He turned to the student. "We spent millennia trying to be diamonds, hard, bright, flawless, but diamonds shatter. These humans, they are iron, they rust, they dent, they bend, but they do not break. The ethel was a lie, child. Or at least an incomplete truth. There is a beauty in the scar, for the scar means you survived to heal." The student looked back at the ugly brace with new eyes. She didn't find it beautiful, not yet, but she stopped looking at it with disgust. She looked at it with respect. Mean. Aboard the Sovereign of Rust Captain Thorne was dealing with his own political nightmare. The human crew was exhausted. They had been running on stimulants and adrenaline for months to get the ship into position. Now that the adrenaline had faded, the reality of their situation set in. They were heroes, yes, but they were also guests in a house that was too clean for them. "Captain," his XO, Commander Sarah Vance, said, dropping a data pad on his desk. The desk was made from the hatch of a cargo airlock. "The Concordat Fleet Command is requesting our engine schematics again. They're being polite, but they're insistent. They want to know how we integrated the singularity drive with a combustion-based thrust manifold without blowing a hole in space-time." Thorne rubbed his eyes. "Tell them the truth. Tell them we used duct tape and prayer." "I told them," Vance smirked. "They asked for the chemical composition of duct tape and the frequency modulation of prayer. They don't get it, Elias. They think we have some secret advanced tech. They can't accept that we just rigged it." "They're scared," Thorne said, standing up and walking to the viewport. The beautiful, bruised planet of Zalprime rotated below. "They realize that their science has a ceiling. They hit the limit of what logic can do. We operate in the realm of the illogical. That's our edge. We need to teach them, Sarah, not just give them the schematics. We need to teach them how to think sideways." The integration began in earnest with the exchange program. It was Fleetmaster Calith who proposed it, surprising everyone. The old warrior had been the most hostile, but he was also the most pragmatic. He had seen his fleet rendered useless by the signal, and he had seen the Sovereign survive. He demanded that his best officers serve a tour on the human ship. The first day the Zaltora officers boarded the Sovereign it was a comedy of errors. They were tall, elegant, and used to ships that were silent and automated. The Sovereign was a factory. It clanged, it hissed. Gravity fluctuated in certain corridors because the grav plates were scavenged from 3 different eras. Calith himself walked the bridge, observing the human crew. He watched a young ensign kick a console to make the display stop flickering. "Barbaric," Calith muttered. "Percussive maintenance," Thorne corrected, stepping up beside him. "The connection is loose. We could spend 4 hours stripping the panel to solder it perfectly, or we can kick it and get back to work. Efficiency, Fleetmaster." "It is imprecise," Calith argued. "It works," Thorne said. And in a firefight, it works beats it's perfect every time. You treat your ships like temples. We treat ours like tools. Tools get scratched. Tools get dirty. Calith paused by a bulkhead. He ran a claw along a weld line. It was rough, beaded. Where did this plating come from? Thorn looked at the section. His expression softened. That's from the UNS Hiroshima Asterisk, one of the first starships we ever built. It didn't have warp drive. It was a generation ship. It drifted for 200 years before it failed. We found the hull floating in deep space. We cut it up and welded it here. It reminds us where we started. Calith looked at the human. You carry your dead with you. We carry their hope, Thorn said. That ship failed, but the metal survived. Now it's protecting a high counselor of the Concordat. That's a promotion, I think. Calith was silent for a long time. We erase our failures, he admitted quietly. When a ship is obsolete, it is atomized. We recycle the energy, but we destroy the form. We believe that keeping old things is heavy. It burdens the spirit. It anchors the spirit, Thorn countered. If you don't know what broke you before, you won't know how to fix yourself next time. The climax of this cultural exchange came not in a classroom, but in the void. Reports came in from the rim. The signal had been the first wave, but the entity that sent it, an automated cosmic harvester known as the Cull Process Asterisk, had sent drones to verify the destruction. They were massive, geometric shapes, cubes of pure black metal that absorbed light. They arrived in the terminus sector scanning for survivors. When they found Zalprime intact, the drones initiated a purge protocol. The Concordat fleet deployed. This time they were not alone. The Sovereign of Rust led the vanguard, but the Concordat ships were different now. They had bolted external armor over their ceramic hulls. They had installed redundant analog backup systems. The battle was chaotic. The black cubes adapted to energy weapons instantly. Plasma fire was useless. They're adapting to the frequency, Calith shouted over the comms from his flagship, the Asterisk Star's Grace Asterisk. My main batteries are ineffective. Switch to kinetics, Thorn roared from the Asterisk Sovereign. Throw rocks at them, Calith. Forget the lasers. We do not have kinetic bat. Eries, Calith replied, frustration evident. Our ships are not designed to throw rocks. Then ram them, Thorn ordered. There was a pause, a silence that spanned light seconds. Ramming was the ultimate taboo. It was suicide. It was ugly. Do it or die perfectly, Thorn yelled. On the bridge of the Asterisk Star's Grace Asterisk, Fleetmaster Calith looked at his pristine console. He looked at the black cube looming on the view screen, charging its disintegration beam. Out of the ugly brace on the university wall, he thought of the human ensign kicking the console. Helmsman, Calith said, his voice dropping into a growl that hadn't been heard in his bloodline for generations. Disengage safety protocols, divert all power to the forward shields, full thrust. Target Fleetmaster. The center of that cube, Calith snarled. Make it messy. The Asterisk Star's Grace Asterisk, a jewel of the galaxy, accelerated. It did not fire, it became a spear. It collided with the black cube with the force of a small asteroid. The impact was horrific. Metal crumpled. The perfect hull of the Concordat ship buckled, shattered, and twisted, but the cube shattered too. The kinetic energy was too much for its absorption fields to handle. The drone exploded in a shower of dark fragments. The Asterisk Star's Grace drifted away, its nose crushed, venting atmosphere, fires raging on 3 decks. It was ruined. It was destroyed. Status. Calith barked, coughing in the smoke. Hull breach on decks 4 through 10. Main power offline. We are venting oxygen. We look terrible, sir. Calith looked at the damage readouts. The ship was a wreck, but on the tactical map the enemy icon was gone. We are alive, Calith whispered. He felt a strange sensation in his chest, a fierce burning pride. He had not won with grace, he had won with brutality. He had survived. Sovereign to Star's Grace, Thorn's voice crackled. Nice hit, Calith. You scratched your paint. I believe I did more than that, Captain, Calith replied, and for the first time in his life he laughed. It was a jagged, clicking laugh. I believe I have become scrap. Welcome to the club, Thorn said. The alliance that formed after the defeat of the Cull drones was not just political, it was philosophical. The aesthetics of survival became a new movement within the Empire. Architects began designing buildings that incorporated flexibility and mixed materials. Engineers began studying the chaotic, redundant systems of human tech. But the biggest change was in the definition of humanity. They were no longer the scavengers. They were the Asterisk Iron Weavers Asterisk, the Binders Asterisk, the species that held the galaxy together when it tried to fall apart. Years later, High Counselor Valdrin stood before a new monument in the center of the Grand Rotunda. The hologram of the Asterisk Sovereign was gone. In its place was a physical object. It was a statue, but not of crystal. It was made of welded scraps, pieces of the Asterisk Star's Grace Asterisk, pieces of the Asterisk Sovereign Asterisk, pieces of the drones. It was ugly. It was jagged. It cast strange shadows on the walls. Valdrin touched the rough metal. He spoke to the assembly, which now included humans, Zaltora, and a dozen other species. "We once believed that the universe was a song," Valdrin said, "and that to join the choir we had to be in perfect tune. But the humans taught us that the universe is not a song. It is a storm, and in a storm you do not need to be in tune. You need to be strong. You need to be able to break and put yourself back together." He looked at Elias Thorne, who sat in the front row, looking uncomfortable in a dress uniform that was still somehow slightly wrinkled. "This monument," Valdrin continued, "is dedicated to the scrap, to the broken things, to the refusal to fade away. We are the Concordat of iron now, and we do not break." Thorne nodded, a slight bow of his head. He looked up at the statue. It didn't look like a hero, it looked like a mess. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. The galaxy was vast, and the dark between the stars was filled with threats that defied logic. Ancient signals, cosmic hungers, and tropic decay. But the fear was gone. The Zaltora and the humans looked into the dark together. They knew that whatever came next, whatever tried to shatter them, they would just pick up the pieces, fire up the welders, and build something new. They would build a bigger ship, and it would be absolutely, gloriously ugly.